Hey, what is up guys, I'm KBHD here, and for a while I used to always carry my smartphone in one pocket and my pocket camera, the Sony RX100, in the other, just because the image quality is that much better. And recently I had the Sony QX lenses come in, and I'll be detailing my experiences with those very shortly on video. But honestly, in a world where the best camera you have is just the one you have with you, smartphone cameras have been getting really good recently. Maybe not good enough to replace your point and shoot, but good enough to make you think twice about taking it with you. So this list might be totally different in 3 months or something at the rate technology is moving nowadays, but this is my totally unscientific and totally unofficial list of the top 5 cameras that also happen to make phone calls. There are 4 categories to my totally unscientific test. Number 1 is sharpness and detail. Number 2 is color accuracy / dynamic range. Number 3 is video. And number 4 is control. So getting right into it, at number 5 is the Samsung Galaxy S4. It's obviously not the newest phone we're going to talk about here, but it's no slouch. It's one of the most popular Android phones out there to date. It has a 13 megapixel sensor and it's rocking an f2.2 aperture. It does not have optical image stabilization, but then again, most smartphones don't have OIS, but it does have it digitally. But more importantly, it has an incredible software suite. Samsung's camera features let you change a ton of different things while shooting. You get all these live filters, you get the burst modes, you get HDR, and you get all the different camera modes essentially that let you choose what sort of shooting experience you want. And in fact, I think this is the best smartphone camera experience when it first came out. When it was first available, it was easily blowing away every other smartphone out there. On my scale, the Galaxy S4 gets an 8 for sharpness and detail thanks to that 13 megapixel sensor and the image processing. And it gets a 7 for colors and dynamic range just because it tends to oversaturate the colors a little bit too much, where it looks maybe more pleasing to the real eye but a little bit less accurate than it should in real life. It gets an 8 for video because the 1080p 30 frames per second video looks stellar. It might not have optical image stabilization like we said, which would make it a little bit smoother and less shaky, but overall you can also take pictures while you're recording. It's got a whole bunch of video features that you can use, so it gets a pretty solid video score. It gets a 9 for controls because like we said, that's its specialty. It has an incredible software suite with a whole bunch of different controls over the shooting experience with all the different modes you get. And it might be a little bit difficult to use at first, which is why it gets a point off, because it's a little bit spread out and it has this weird menu on the top left corner where it also has a menu when you hit the menu button, so it's a little bit too spread out, but you'll get to learn it, and it has a 5-inch 1080p viewfinder that makes it spacious enough to enjoy the shooting experience. Overall, that brings it to a total score of 32. So coming in at number 4 is the LG G2, which is often seen as a direct competitor to the Galaxy S4 nowadays. It's one of the prettier phones that have been released recently. I mean, that bezel, have you seen it? It's pretty sweet. And it's also rocking a 13 megapixel sensor with optical image stabilization. And I don't know if people realize how rare actual optical image stabilization is inside of the smartphones we have today because of how thin and small the smartphones we're making are, but it's pretty impressive when they actually pull it off. And LG's been working really hard on their cameras, especially. We see the improvement from the LG Optimus G camera a year ago. So the G2 scores an 8 for sharpness and detail thanks to the 13 megapixel sensor and optical image stabilization. It gets a 7 for color accuracy and dynamic range because it tends to actually undersaturate a tiny bit, but it also has decent dynamic range. And it gets a 9 for video thanks to that 1080p 30 frames per second recording and image stabilization, which smooths out video a lot. And it also has a great mic. A lot of people don't realize that. And it gets an 8 for the slightly less intuitive but still full of features control. Maybe it could use a little organizational update through a software update, but it's pretty good. So it flip-flops the last 2 scores of the Galaxy S4 and ends up with that score again of 32. So number 3 is the very new iPhone 5S. And iPhones, as long as we know them, have always been hailed as brilliant camera smartphone performers, and this new iPhone is no exception, and it's actually an improvement over last year's iPhone 5. It still has an 8 megapixel sensor, same as the last iPhone, but this new sensor is a little bit bigger, so it's going to give you bigger pixels, which is going to give you better dynamic range and better low light performance. And it's also rocking an f2.2 aperture with the new lens, so it's going to give you even better low light performance. But what's neat about the new iPhone, which is a little trick it has, is a new dual tone flash on the back. So it has a white flash and an amber LED flash, and it'll basically evaluate the scene and determine which amount of each flash it needs to flash to get the most accurate colors and skin tone representation. So that's a neat trick. So the new iPhone grabs an 8 for sharpness and detail thanks to the new sensor and excellent image processing. It gets a 9 for accurate colors on dynamic range, Plus, it kind of can cheat a little bit because the HDR button is right there in the viewfinder at all times, which no other phone on this list has readily accessible. So if you really want to turn on HDR, it's always there, and I found it to have some of the best color representation of any phone that I take pictures with. It also gets a 9 for video because not only is the 1080p video pretty good, it also has a 720p 120 frames per second recording mode where you can basically slow it down and get super slow motion footage, maybe action footage or whatever else you want to shoot in super slow motion that you wouldn't ordinarily get. Again, it doesn't have optical image stabilization, which is why it's losing a point, and it can be a little bit shaky at times, but it does look pretty sweet. And it finishes with an 8 for control, because honestly, you don't get all that much control for the iPhone, but what you do get control over is very simple, very easy to use, intuitive, and just always works. The HDR is also some of the best I've seen, again, in any phone because it doesn't over-process or over-exaggerate the lows or the highs that it's bringing in. So it's a pretty good camera. That totals out to give the iPhone 5S a score of 34. So number 2 is the Beast. It's the Nokia Lumia 1020, probably best known for its camera. And this is gonna be easily the most favorite choice, most popular choice among people who are used to using higher end cameras and DSLRs and things like that. The Lumia 1020 has a 41 megapixel sensor. A 41 megapixel sensor behind some beautiful f2.2 aperture Carl Zeiss glass, a real xenon flash instead of just LED lights turning on and off, and has a focus assist light and has the largest sensor physically of any of the other smartphones on this list, which means it's going to get excellent low light performance and a very shallow depth of field, which is unusual for a smartphone. The 1020 does have its faults though, mostly in the image processing. I found the biggest problems I had with it to be in the color representation. I consistently got strange colors. You know, maybe I'll be taking 10 shots with the Lumia 1020 and 7 of them will be beautiful, perfect shots. Wouldn't expect to ever get that out of a smartphone. And then 3 of them will just look awful because of the color and the image processing. So if I had any problem with the Lumia 1020, it's how it processed the photos that it took with that incredible lens and sensor. So it's a 10 for sharpness and detail. I mean, come on, it's 41 megapixels. And even the oversampled 5 megapixel shareable shots that it gives you are extremely sharp. So that's useful. And plus you can crop down those 41 megapixel sensors for lossless zoom. And you end up getting like some really sweet shots, even if you didn't intend to take them from that far away. The colors and dynamic range score is a 7, just because of the slight color shifts and frequent processing problems I had with color accuracy. The video score only drops a point and it gets a 9 because it's pretty much gorgeous video. You have the very large sensor for the shallow depth of field. You didn't get a very close minimum focusing distance, so sometimes you'd tap to focus and it wouldn't focus on what you wanted it to, but you get optical image stabilization, so it's smooth video, the microphone's pretty good, just the colors are a little bit off. And the control score is a 9. The ProCam app from Nokia is one of the most powerful, versatile camera apps in any smartphone, period, to this date. It gives you full control, manual control if you want, over every single aspect of the phone, even manual focusing if you want it. Now, the one point off of it is really nitpicking. Like, there's no built-in HDR. It can only take bracketing that you'd have to bring into Photoshop to make an HDR yourself. And there's other little things like that, like the viewfinder is only 720p. But overall, it's an excellent application. Plus, you get the ability to crop with lossless, no loss of detail afterwards, which is kind of just icing on the cake. That gives the Lumia 1020 a total score of 35. So that brings us to the number 1 camera on a smartphone, which on this scale belongs to the Samsung Galaxy Note 3. Now, this may be a little bit confusing at first because on paper that should be very close to the Galaxy S4. But when you look deeper into it, you'll see that the performance and the experience increases you get out of using the Note 3 are very crucial. It is indeed rocking a 13 megapixel sensor and an f2.2 aperture, just like the Galaxy S4. It might even be the exact same hardware, but the image processing is different. I found the exposures to actually be a bit better. The Galaxy S4 sort of tends to overexpose just a little bit. The noise reduction was also a bit less aggressive, and there was also more sharpening done. So the photos looked more sharp, more crisp, more clean. So the sharpness and detail score is a 9. This thing takes incredible highlight photos, like outdoor photos and regular light photos. It looks just gorgeous on any display. For colors and dynamic range, this grabs the 8, the same as the Galaxy S4 did, for slightly oversaturated colors that look a little bit more vivid than real life, but yet still are not too crazy that they're unappealing to the eye. For video, this thing is an animal. Now, it already takes great 1080p video, but instead of the iPhone's super slow-mo trick, the Note 3 takes 4K video. It takes ultra high definition 4K video. A lot of people don't realize the versatility of 4K video is the same as the versatility of a 41 megapixel photo. Obviously, no one has a 41 megapixel monitor to appreciate the Lumia 1020's photos in their full glorious resolution, but you can still appreciate them as being sharper and more detailed on no matter what display you're looking at than your traditional photo. Plus, you have the ability to crop down and keep a lot of that detail and make a better looking photo out of a portion of the huge photo you took. That same advantage comes to 4K. So most people really usually don't have 4K displays, although some people do. But you can actually see the difference between a 4K video and a 1080p video on a display like that, a 2560 by 1600 display. But more importantly, you can actually crop down and use 4K video in just a portion of that for a 1080p clip, which I've actually done on the Note 3. It looks really impressive. The same way you would crop down a 41 megapixel shot to get what you want in the frame, you can do exactly that with the Note 3's 4K video to make a great looking 1080p video. So all of this would earn it a 10, but it doesn't have optical image stabilization, so it gets it a 9. And in the control department, it also is very similar to the Galaxy S4 software, and it gets a 9, although there are some nice improvements, like you get a much larger 5.7-inch viewfinder, and you also get better performance and more RAM for the longer burst shots. But what's weird is they actually removed the night mode and included a golf mode. Someone want to explain that? It's a little weird, but yeah, it gets a 9. So that gives the Note 3 an overall total, slightly more balanced total score of 35. So why the Note 3 over the Lumia 1020 despite the same score? Honestly, it's just a little more well-rounded, and that makes a better package. A lot of people don't realize the versatility of 4K video, and as a video person here doing videos on YouTube, I kind of internally weighted video a little bit more. But at the end of the day, it's your money being spent. What's your number one? What's your number one smartphone camera? I will have links to everything I've talked about in this video, all the smartphones, right below that like button. So if you want to hit that up, those will all be there. Plus, I'll also have all the full reviews of all the smartphones I talked about. And then I'll include some honorable mentions because there are some smartphone cameras that weren't in the top 5 that are still great, even though they didn't make the list. So I'll include those below as well. Either way, that's been it. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this coming out very soon. And that's it. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.